collapsed porch issue. So, but you know, that obviously there was a need to you know, keep these buildings up to code and so forth. So, yes, sir.
Do we have an update on the status of the Uptown building?
Joe, anything you can add?
There was a deal to restore the theater pre-COVID. COVID killed the deal when one of the investors pulled out. The good news is the city, state, federal funding and historic tax credits are all still in play. So once the funding and the private equity end of the deal maintains, gets back to where it needs to be, the project's going to resume.
Great. Let's keep our fingers crossed. I went to that big news conference Rahm Emanuel held in the beautiful lobby of the Uptown, where he more or less promised it would be done shortly, but here we are 7, 8, 9, 10 years later, I forget.
That was the deal COVID killed.
But you're using his bar names. His name is really Dave.
David! Sorry, Dave,
It's okay.
Dave
My
Selchuk,
alias.
sorry.
He's been called worse. So don't worry.
We have our great volunteer filming today's program, Jim Duros, and we're hoping to get the video up on our website if you want to tell your friends if they missed today's program. So, any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Maybe this is a little off the wall, but I'm just wondering, since we lost our Good Nookies, since we lost Good Nookies restaurant, and
Yeah.
then also Francisco's and Pearl's, Good Creek Italian restaurants, are we going to get any good restaurants back?
That's the alderman's job, ask her.
Yeah. I know there's a Bryn Mawr task force in place. They're looking to kind of jumpstart things once the construction is completed. So a lot of issues over on Bryn Mawr,
But All Meals Prep is now in the Nookies building, and they just got their liquor license. I was just there for a meeting the other night, so.
yeah, there was a lot of conflicting information that was going to be torn down and replaced with a 6 or 7 story building.
Yeah, I don't know if that's on hold right now. That entire block from what was Nookies all the way to the L was going to be torn down in a 5-story building, but I don't know if that's on hold now because All Meals Prep just signed a new lease, so we're trying to find out the status of that block.
But you know, too, I can't stress enough, people need to contact Lenny's office and get involved in this because she doesn't listen, she doesn't return phone calls. They have a ZAC committee that doesn't care what we think, and we have to make them care what we think. It's very important. She was invited today, wasn't she?
Yes, one of her staff members was here. Jorge was here for the first hour and 15 minutes. So. And again, the city meeting at Farama, it's a week from Monday on December 16th from 6 to 7 p.m. I have no idea what to expect there, but I'm guessing it's going to be, this is what we've determined, this is what you're going to get. If there's going to be any changes after that, I think it's only going to be through concerted efforts of concerned community members.
Yes, there are 3 major projects right now in Edgewater, and I say major, as I mentioned before, that whole empty lot where from Bryn Mawr to Hollywood that the CTA tore down, that whole block there is a major master plan project, and the whole section underneath the L that's still in question, what they're going to do with that space, is still a major project we really have to get a hold of.
Yes.
In terms of communicating to the alderman, what's the best message? What do we need to say to make sure that we can? Is it preservation that we're concerned about? Is it the density, building size, height?
Yeah, a combination of things. And you know, again, we tried to advocate around these issues. Short of, didn't ever quite get up to a full-blown lobbying campaign, as it were, but there's so many other issues we're dealing with as well at the same time. But that whatever gets done, that it's also give consideration to the commercial aspects of the street, the scale of the street, to not necessarily overwhelm the entire community with more housing and people that we can really support, with whether it's with their cars or not. I've been to a number of community meetings, and I'm an avid bicyclist myself, but there's a coterie of very angry bike people who tend to what I call AstroTurf community meetings. There were a lot of them at that Broadway meeting back in October. I expect they'll all be back in December. They are like the amen corner for high-density development without too much nuance in their thinking. It's just like, well, just if it's 1 or 2 stories, it needs to go, and something 10 stories ought to be put up. There are a lot of streets around the north side that, in my estimation, have been ruined because they just got too dense. Belmont out around Roscoe Village, West Roscoe Village on Roscoe Street, for the most part, is beautifully mixed with old and new. It retains a really nice pedestrian scale, so it's a thriving commercial district and residential. That I think should be the model. Over on Belmont, further north around Belmont and Damon, it's 5-story buildings all up and down.
And that bike, I mean, have you guys been on that area, that Belmont area? It was a bike?
What about it?
I'm a biker too, but even how they have them going off, and the green space is off onto the sidewalk area.
Oh, yeah.
And so then people are waiting for the bus stops, which
Yeah.
are now, that's the situation that's happening. And I mean, mind you, I appreciate the forward thinking, but it's even more unsafe for bikers. And
Yeah,
then so congested on such a high,
over on Clark Street, they
the buses.
redeveloped the streetscape to allegedly facilitate biking, but yes, some of the things where the bike lane goes up over the sidewalk and all that,
and it's icy. I mean,
Yeah.
with the leaves and with
they don't have a plan to clear the leaves out of the bike lanes.
Well,
So.
snow, how are they getting
and
the
snow.
snow?
And you've got pedestrians having to cross the active bike lane
Right.
where it's level with the sidewalk to get to the bus.
Yes.
Yeah, it's,
One last thing, when you talk to the alderman's office, one thing that you need to demand too is local community meetings, block
Right.
Yeah.
meetings, which they are averse to, and
Yep.
we have to keep pushing that because it's important.
Yeah.
Harry always did that. We would get the block club that was involved in any development that was going to happen. We would have meetings, we would meet with the developer. None of that is happening.
yeah, I mean, people like Bob Reamer in the back, and I mean, these were people who were in the trenches. Jack Markowski, of course, who made Kenmore Winthrop one of the great success stories in urban development in America. They were very involved. The Edgewater Community Council obviously had a big role to play in turning around the fortunes of Broadway. So, and they always had a very close working relationship with the elected officials. So, we have new blood. We're trying to foster as much cooperation as possible. So, it's an ongoing effort. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm a Roscoe Village refugee. I lived there for 25 years, and been in the neighborhood for a few years, and love it up here, and really appreciate the presentation today, and a lot of really excellent food for thought, and really. And valuing what's here while it can still be saved.
Yeah.
One note about your organization. I wish the name, also looked forward, because you're obviously focused on the past and the future. So I made just a thought, because it could be pigeonholed as just backwards looking, and I think you're much more than that.
We try.
Yeah.
And maybe that is something we'll look at some point. Jack?
Yeah, I apologize for my voice, but I'm going to try to say a couple things about what to be. I hope everybody goes to the meeting on December 16th, right at Furama. To me, some of the main points are, number one, there's really no reason to be doing anything right now. I mean, one of the things is this is kind of like they're pushing forward aggressively with a broad brush solution to what? I don't even, nobody, it's not clear at all to what. The second is, that's number one.
It's a solution in search of a problem.
Right. But what's the problem? But as John said, it seems to be driven by planning department bureaucrats who like have some planning theory about how they think Broadway should look, and it's just a broad brush thing. But there's really not a problem, I don't think, right now. Number two, Broadway is this broad brush solution is ridiculous. Every part of Broadway is distinct. When we talked about at the south end, this planning thing goes all the way to past the Uptown Theatre, all the way to Montrose, past to Argyle, and then it comes up and goes into the area between Foster and Bryn Mawr, and then we have where Lakeshore Drive ends, between Bryn Mawr and Hollywood, and then you have the whole area north of Hollywood and on up to by Loyola. All those are distinct areas, and everything, there's a broad brush across the whole thing, which is what they're doing is ridiculous. The other thing is, west of, as Tom said, west of Broadway, east of Broadway, very different. Right? The west of Broadway borders is the transition in our area. Frankly, this is not true south of Foster so much, but in our area in Edgewater, west of the west side of Broadway is a transition to a residential area, which is generally three stories at the max, but it's almost all residential. Very different on the east side. That's a thought to bear in mind also. The other thing I'd say is, I think the two themes, for some reason, I can tell you, at the alderman's office, Bob Reamer and I serve on the zoning advisory committee. They hate the concept of contextual design. And to me, contextual design is the foundation of zoning. In other words, what fits in this context? What is it next to? What are the externalities going to be from this? How does it fit in? They look at contextual design, and they think that's another word for NIMBY, anti-development, and it's just keep it out of my area. And it's very weird that, I mean, to me, a foundational aspect of zoning is context, and you do things that are complementary to each other. That's one theme. The other theme, I think this is important today, because I think that preservation of historic buildings is for whatever reason, is a more politically correct way to talk about things than contextual design. And the contextual design jumps into racist accusations, NIMBYism, all these kinds of things. And I think historic preservation is a more acceptable.
Beyond jargon, also on the environmental front, obviously.
Yes.
The greenest building is the one that's already standing. So.
And one final thing I'd say is, because I've worked in housing all my life, the idea that density on Broadway creates housing affordability is total bullshit. I mean, this is just not true at all. And every single unit that is produced there is more expensive than the unit that it replaces. Every single one of them. Now, I will say you can get a 20% affordability on some of this new design. That's part of an affordable requirements ordinance. But that's a drop in the bucket. And the idea, there is already, you see all these buildings, I don't know about that one, but all of these 3- and 4-story buildings that are historic buildings, believe me, if they have apartments above them, they're affordable. And they're more affordable than anything new that will go on.
Relatively affordable, right, compared to what would be there.
I was going to say, Jack, contextual design is my middle name.
I know.
Which I like. And our document about Broadway, it's not about preservation. The title is Preserve, Revive, and Develop. So we're really looking into the future, not just preservation, but recycling, repurposing, our historic buildings.
Troy?
Yeah, I just to piggyback on what Jack said and what we've all been saying here though, would it be possible, and it gets to your question over there, ma'am, is there a way for the Historical Society to thoughtfully list a few talking points, put these things on the website so that when we send emails, we already have, we're still speaking with one voice.
There you go.
And if you don't agree with everything, that's why there'll be several talking points. You can focus in on the one that is the most important to you. So, and then at least there'll be that little piece that we can, after that, go ahead and put our own touches to. But it's kind of like, where do you start? Is that in the newsletter? Do we already have that in the newsletter? Margie?
I mean, I think it's interwoven in a lot of stuff we've done, but,
Yeah,
you
but
know, if
let's
we were
have
to
some
like
list.
trying to mobilize a campaign, then.
Yeah.
Dave,
All right,
third time's the charm.
And an example of what they call traffic calming, an example of that is on Lawrence Avenue from Ashland to Weston.
Yeah.
That was
thanks.
reduced from 4 lanes into 2.
Thank you, yeah, that's,
So-
I used to live right at Lawrence and Clark, and, yes, just as Dave is
It's
saying.
increased the congestion,
Increase the
and
congestion.
it sent the
you now have
traffic to the other
backed
streets
up.
like Winnemac and
Yeah.
Wilson Avenue.
And this
So
is
it
what
hasn't
just happened
reduced
on
any
Clark
traffic,
Street.
it just sent it in another
Exactly.
way, so.
And now the city's pushing to close off
For
Granville.
Broadway.
Granville.
Oh, yeah, and that was where
Yeah.
there wasn't any audience questions.
Yes, exactly.
Post-it notes.
Yep.
But
So-
Kenmore, Winthrop, Glenwood, that will get the brunt of the traffic if that occurs on Broadway.
Well, possibly, and also just as a side note, that, and we're maybe delving into a whole other discussion, maybe this is another program we do next year, but that we already have north-south bike lanes I use all the time on Kenmore and Winthrop, so.
Broadway goes a single lane, that's gonna be the result.
Those, yes, absolutely, we're seeing that on the west side of the neighborhood over here.
Actually, I do Kenmore and Winthrop right now, and I can't believe the backup of traffic. There must be something that's happening, because they're backed up all the way on Kenmore and Winthrop, trying to get out to Hollywood, you know, or
Yeah.
onto the drive shared road. There's already backup going on.
Hollywood's usually backed up all the time, so.
Yeah.
One last question, our co-speakers better have.
I just, one of the things that I always struggle with is the idea of how much height you can build for the quality of the building. And I think a lot of times we restrict height to the developers, which means they put up junk, because that's the only way they can make their margins work.
Yeah.
So how should we, as promoters of preservation, how should we address that?
That's an excellent question, and if we had a more thoughtful process going on, that would be probably the core issue going on, because right now, as several people in this room have noted, when you just throw away the restrictive zoning or the limits on the zoning, you lose your last point of leverage to try to force them to do something better looking. So I don't know if this building, for instance, went through any of that kind of back and forth, but the one we highlighted earlier, there was definitely, because the developer wanted that extra story, they had to do extra things, so.
John, can I just say, maybe, so as an example, somebody referred to this 5830 North Broadway, which is a 6-story building that is going up. And in my opinion, it went through a fine process. I think what was allowed there was probably a 4-story building. And the developer came and said he needed to do 6 stories. He laid out a design. He talked to the community. They talked to the block clubs around there. There was a discussion. Well, I reached out to the block clubs around there, and the block clubs did not have a significant problem with it. And so there was, what I'm saying is that, as John just said, at least if you don't open the door to everything, at least as you have like a threshold to go through, I don't think people are going to be unreasonable, but it provides some level of protection.
Thank you. Well, I think that on that note, why don't we wrap up with watch this space. A lot of the recommendations maybe will be turning into something more later. Thank you.